Patricia came to see me, as usual, in the afternoon. She and I had been friends for over 30 years, since I had just moved to San Miguel with my late husband. She worked at the same pharmacy in the main square where she still works, and I got a job as an accountant for the municipality. Our children grew up together, and we shared all our joys and sorrows. "So, Clarabelle, how are things going with the wedding?" she asked, sitting down in her favorite chair in the kitchen and accepting a cup of coffee from me. I sighed and pulled a thick folder of receipts and printouts out of my desk drawer. Over the past 2 months, that folder had become my biggest headache. Every day it was filled with new documents, new invoices, new commitments. "Look for yourself." I spread the papers out on the table, trying to organize them by date. "The banquet for 100 people is $12,000, that's our half." I spent a long time choosing a restaurant, traveled all over the city. Las Palmas seemed the most suitable, and the prices are reasonable and the cuisine is good. Patricia scrutinized the receipts, shaking her head from time to time. She knew how much I earned in the municipality and realized that such sums were astronomical for me. "The photographer, 1,200, I continued. Valeria insisted on that young guy from the capital who filmed the wedding of the mayor's daughter. Musicians, $800. She wanted a whole orchestra, but I convinced her to limit herself to a quartet. Decorations, $900. Flowers, ribbons, candles, it all adds up to a decent sum. I picked up the next check and cringed, remembering that day at the flower store. "The bridal bouquet and boutonniere, $350. Can you imagine, Patty? $350 for flowers that would wilt in a day?" And Valeria stood in front of me with eyes like I was going to rob her of her last happiness. Patricia sipped her coffee and looked at me carefully. There was a look of concern in her eyes that she tried to hide. "And that's not all," I continued, shifting the papers. "Valerie's dress cost $2,300. We went to 3 different salons until she found the right one. The shoes were $400, and that was assuming she would only wear them for a few hours. Lingerie, tights, gloves, another $200. I set the checks aside and rubbed my temples. Headaches had been my constant companion since the wedding preparations began. "And last week I bought them a car," I added more quietly. "A used Honda from 2007, but in very good condition. The mechanic said the engine was as good as new and the body had no major damage. $8,000 cash." Patricia put the papers aside and looked at me with undisguised horror. "Clarabelle, you've already spent over $20,000. $20,450 to be exact," I corrected, and there was bitterness in my voice. "And that's just our half. Leandro's parents are putting in the same amount too, though I know it's hard on them." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where the neighborhood kids were playing. My children, Valeria and Fabian, used to play the same way. Back then, our needs were modest and our joys were simple. "Soledad works as a seamstress at home," I told Patricia without looking away from the window. "She sews for the locals for pennies, and Augusto works as a security guard in a factory for minimum wage. They took out a loan from the bank to pay for their part of the wedding." I'm ashamed to look them in the eye. Patricia came over to me and put his hand on my shoulder. "How do you know about the loan?" Soledad told me when we met to discuss the details of the gala. Her eyes were red from crying, apologizing that she couldn't afford more. And I'm sitting here with a lot of money, wondering if this is the right thing to do. We went back to the table, and I started going through the papers again. Patricia watched me silently, shaking her head from time to time. "Do you remember my wedding?" I asked suddenly. Of course I remember. Simple, modest, but very sincere. "We had only $500 for the whole celebration," I continued with a nostalgic smile. "The dress was given to me by my neighbor Carmen, who had gotten married the year before. The shoes were bought at a thrift store for $20. The jewelry was a thin gold ring from Ricardo and small earrings, a gift from his mother." "And you were happy," Patricia added. "Very happy. Ricardo was a bank clerk then, and I was just starting my career in the municipality. We rented a tiny apartment on the outskirts of town and counted every peso, but we felt like we had everything." I was silent, immersed in my memories. Patricia waited patiently, realizing I needed to talk. "Everything changed after Ricardo died," I continued quietly. When I found out how much money he'd saved, I felt guilty. For 30 years we'd lived modestly, denied ourselves many things, and he'd saved every dollar he could. He was a wise man, Patricia said, thinking about the future of the family. I suppose so, but sometimes I feel like I'm betraying his memory by spending that money on Valerie's whims. He would never have approved of such an expense for a wedding. Patricia sipped her coffee and looked at me thoughtfully. What does Fabian say about all this? Fabian? I smiled sadly. He doesn't get involved at all. He says it's women's business and he doesn't care. He's got his own worries, a job, a small salary, a rented apartment. He never asks for anything, even when he clearly needs help. Does Valeria know how much money you have? This question made me wary. I never told my children the exact amount of inheritance, but Valeria has always been curious and persistent. I think she guesses that I have savings, I answered cautiously, but she doesn't know the exact figures. I hope so. At that moment, the front door slammed and quick footsteps rustled down the hallway. Valerie burst into the kitchen without even saying hello to Patricia. Her face was excited, her cheeks flushed from walking so fast, and she was holding a glossy magazine. Mom, I found the perfect jewelry! She opened the magazine in front of me, nearly knocking over the coffee cups. Look at the earrings! And the matching bracelet! It's a work of art! On the glossy page were gold earrings with small diamonds and a dainty bracelet in the same style. Even in the photo, it was obvious that the things were very expensive, the work of a skilled jeweler. Very beautiful, dear, I said carefully, trying not to show my concern. How much did they cost? Only $3,000 for a set. Valeria spoke as if they were perfect pennies. Can you imagine, Mom? Only $3,000. That's nothing compared to what we've already spent on this wedding. Patricia choked on her coffee, and I felt a sharp pain in my temples. The migraine that had been plaguing me for weeks had gotten worse. Valeria, honey, I tried to stay calm. We already bought you some really nice jewelry. Do you remember your grandmother's pearl necklace and those gold earrings I wore at my wedding? They'll complement your look perfectly. Mom, what are you talking about? My daughter rolled her eyes and waved me away like a pesky fly. This is old, antiques, and I need something modern, stylish. I have only one wedding in my life. Do you really want me to look like a beggar from the last century? But $3,000, I began, feeling my voice shaking. Mom, please. Valeria changed her tone abruptly, becoming soft and persuasive. You have money, I know. And then, think logically. How many photos will remain as a memento? How many people will see these pictures? You don't want me to be ashamed of my wedding photos for the rest of my life, do you? She sat down next to me and took my hand. At such moments, Valeria always became especially affectionate and charming, and I, like a fool, gave in to these manipulations. Clarabelle, Patricia said quietly but firmly, maybe you shouldn't. Valeria is already a very beautiful girl. Any jewelry will look great on her, and her grandmother's pearls are a family heirloom. They have much more value than any jewelry you can buy. Valeria turned sharply to her mother's friend, and on her face reflected poorly concealed irritation. Aunt Patty, you don't understand the current trends, she said with barely perceptible condescension in her voice. It's not just jewelry, it's an investment in the future. Good gold pieces from a famous jeweler can always be sold at a good price or passed on to your children as an inheritance. An investment for $3,000? Patricia was surprised, raising an eyebrow. What's the big deal? Valeria stood up and began to walk nervously around the kitchen, waving the magazine. Do you think I'm asking for some unthinkable money? Yes. I saw weddings in the capital, where the bride was in jewelry for $15,000. And here only $3,000 for a set from the famous jeweler Esteban Mendoza. It's practically a gift. I looked at my daughter and felt a strange mixture of love, pity, and irritation growing inside me. Valeria paced the kitchen like a caged tigress, and I could see that she was ready to do anything to get what she wanted. Mom, she stopped in front of me and took my hands in hers. I know it seems like a lot of money to you, but think about it. When else am I going to have a big day like this? When else will all the attention be on me? This is my big day. I thought back to my wedding 32 years ago. We only had $500 for the whole thing, and we were happy. My dress was a neighbor's and the decorations were very simple. but I felt like the queen of the world. Valeria, I tried to explain, happiness is not in expensive jewelry. The main thing is the love that binds you to Leandro. Mom, do not start these moralizing, interrupted my daughter with undisguised irritation. Of course love is important, but it does not mean that you need to look like a pea scarecrow. Leandro deserves a beautiful wife, and I deserve a decent wedding. Patricia put the cup on the table and looked at Valeria carefully. And what does Leandro himself think about such expenses? She asked. Leandro understands that a wedding is a woman's business, Valeria replied, blushing slightly. He fully trusts my taste and choice. But I noticed that my daughter averted her eyes when she said that. Apparently, the groom didn't approve of such spending, but Valeria, as always, insisted on her own. Mom, please. She squatted down next to my chair and put her head on my lap, as she used to do as a child when she wanted to beg for something. This is the last request. I won't ask for anything more, I promise. After the wedding, I'll be a grown-up, serious woman, and I'll stop bothering you. Patricia looked at us and shook her head slowly. She had known Valerie since she was born, and she remembered how many times my daughter had made similar promises and how many times she had broken them. I stroked my daughter's hair and thought about the fact that this really might be the last time she would ask me for money. After the wedding, she would be living with her husband, and they would have their own worries, their own lives. Maybe I should give in one more time. Okay, I said finally, and my voice sounded tired. But this is really the last time, Valeria. I don't have unlimited possibilities, and I can't spend money left and right. Of course, Mommy. My daughter jumped up and hugged me tightly, pressing her cheek against my cheek. You are the best mom in the world. I will go to town tomorrow and order this set. The master said it would be ready in a week, just in time for the wedding. Valeria grabbed a magazine and ran out of the kitchen, humming some fancy song. The sound of her footsteps on the stairs to the bedroom faded into silence, and Patricia and I sat in silence, looking at the receipts and bills on the table. Clarabelle, she said quietly after a few minutes, are you sure you're doing the right thing? What do you mean? I asked, even though I knew exactly where she was going with this. Well, a lifetime of indulging her whims. I remember when she was 16 and she begged you for an expensive prom dress. Then a car when she went to college when she could take the bus. Then money to rent a nice apartment when she could live at home. Now the wedding. I poured myself another cup of coffee, trying not to make eye contact with my friend. Patricia was right, but what could I do? After Ricardo's death, I felt guilty for the children. They were without a father, and I suddenly had the money my husband had saved all his life. Wasn't it natural to spend it on the children? Fabian is not like that, I said in my defense. He never asks for anything, even when he clearly needs help. He lives in that shabby rented apartment, rides an ancient motorcycle that breaks down every week. Exactly, Patricia agreed. And Valeria is used to you doing whatever she wants. She does not even think about how much it costs you, not only in money, but also in nerves. We fell silent. It was beginning to get dark outside, and I lit the lamp over the desk. In the yellow light, the documents and checks looked even more threatening. Over the next few days, I went to the bank several times to withdraw money for Valerie. Each time, it became an increasingly agonizing process. Withdrawing $3,000 from the deposit was more difficult than I had thought. I had to fill out a lot of paperwork, explain to the manager why I needed such a sum in cash, and endure his surprised and judgmental glances. Señora Cáceres, the young manager said to me for the last time, are you sure you want to withdraw another large sum? You have already withdrawn nearly $30,000 in the last month. Perhaps you should consider a more intelligent allocation of funds? I blushed with embarrassment and hastily replied that everything was under control. But when I left the bank with an envelope full of bills, I felt as if I had committed a crime. Valeria, meanwhile, called every day from the capital, where she had ordered jewelry, and told about the various little things she still had to buy. Each call ended with a request for money for another absolutely necessary thing. Mom, can I have another $500? She asked on the phone Thursday night. There are such beautiful sandals at the same salon where I ordered the jewelry. They go perfectly with the dress. They're just made for each other. Valeria, you already have shoes, I reminded her tiredly. We bought them last month, remember? Mom, come on. In the voice of my daughter sounded sincere surprise. Those shoes were for the ceremony in the church, and these are for dancing at the banquet. All modern brides do this. They should have at least 2 pairs of shoes, one solemn, the other comfortable for fun. I closed my eyes and rubbed the bridge of my nose. The headache was becoming unbearable. All right, I said at last. But only $500, and that's definitely it. Sure, Mommy. Thank you so much. The next day I went to the bank again. The teller already recognized my face and smiled sympathetically, apparently guessing what was going on in my family. Patricia came by every day and saw me growing more and more stressed and tired. My expenses were snowballing, and even though I still had money left in my account, I was beginning to seriously worry about the future. Why don't you have a serious talk with her? Patricia suggested on Friday, as we sat on the terrace with cups of tea. Explain to her that money is not rubber and not infinite. What's the use? I waved my hands tiredly. Before the wedding is less than a week away, everything is already ordered and paid for. It's too late to change anything drastically. The only thing left to do is to finish the job. But at least for the future, insisted her friend. Valeria must realize that she cannot count on your money for the rest of her life. You too have the right to a peaceful old age. In the evening, when Valeria returned from the capital with the next shopping bags, I tried to have a serious conversation about our expenses. But my daughter was so excited about the upcoming wedding that she practically did not listen to me, answering one-wordedly and absent-mindedly. Mom, don't worry about that right now, she said as she sorted through her purchases. After the wedding, Leandro and I will have our own lives, and I won't bother you with such requests anymore, I promise. But something in her tone, some peculiar intonation, made me wary. Valeria spoke as if she had some concrete plans for my future, which I didn't know about yet. And this somehow alarmed me more than all the previous expenses. 3 days before the wedding, I was to have a family dinner with Leandro's parents at my house. Soledad Hernandez had called me in the morning and timidly asked if it would be inconvenient if they came at 7 p.m. sharp, just as Augusto was returning from work at the factory. I spent the whole day getting ready. I wanted everything to be perfect. It was practically the last time our families would meet before the wedding. I bought good meat for the roast, fresh vegetables for the salad, baked my signature lemon pie. I set the table with the best plates that I only got for special occasions. Soledad and Augusto arrived exactly at 7, holding hands like newlyweds. Both looked a little stiff in their festive clothes. Soledad wore a simple navy blue dress that she had apparently sewn herself. The stitches were neat, but the cut was clearly not from a fashion magazine. Augusto wore the only suit he wore to church on Sundays. Welcome, I greeted them at the door. Please come in, make yourself at home. They entered, looking around with undisguised admiration. My house was modest, but after my husband's death, I had done some renovations and updated the furniture. Compared to their home, which I'd seen once when we'd discussed the details of the wedding, mine seemed luxurious. It's beautiful, Soledad said quietly, looking at the new curtains in the living room. And what a wonderful smell! You must have been cooking all day. Not much, I replied, though I had spent hours in the kitchen. Have a seat, please. Valeria and Leandro should be here any minute. Augusto settled awkwardly in the chair, trying not to wrinkle the cushions. Fatigue was written all over his face, as the day's work in the factory had not been easy for him. He looked older than his 55 years. His hands were calloused from physical labor, and the corners of his eyes had deep wrinkles. How are things going at work? I asked, trying to make casual conversation. Nothing. Not much, he replied, clearly not used to being the center of attention. There's enough work. That's good. The main thing is to keep my health in check. Soledad sat on the edge of the couch with her hands in her lap. She often glanced at her fingers, needle-studded from the constant sewing. A few times I noticed her discreetly wiping her palms on her dress. She must have been worried. And how are you doing with orders? I turned to her. Thank God there are customers, replied Soledad with a shy smile. True. Now everyone wants to sew cheaper. We have to reduce prices. But what can you do? These are the times. I offered them coffee, and we sat in the living room discussing the weather and local news. The conversation was difficult, and it was obvious that the Hernandezes felt out of place. They kept glancing at each other, as if looking for support. Around 8:30, Valeria and Leandro arrived. The daughter burst into the house like a hurricane, loudly saying something about her trip to the city for last-minute preparations. She was wearing a new dress that cost more than Augusto's monthly salary, and it was visible to the naked eye. "Hello, everyone," she announced after barely saying hello. "I'm sorry I'm late. I was dealing with a last-minute issue with the florist. Can you believe this man doesn't know the difference between pink and powder color?" Leandro followed her, looking somewhat embarrassed. He kissed his mother on the cheek and shook his father's hand firmly. Unlike the bride, the groom was dressed simply and modestly. "How are you doing, son?" Augusto asked, and there was tenderness in his voice. "I'm fine, Dad. A lot of work, but that's okay." We moved to the dining room and I started serving dinner. The roast was a success and the vegetables were fresh and crisp. The Hernandezes ate with obvious pleasure. Apparently they didn't have such a rich table at home. "Clarabelle, this is delicious," Soledad said, tasting the meat. "You must give me the recipe." "Of course, I'd love to," I replied. "It's not difficult, it just takes time and patience." Valeria, meanwhile, was picking at her plate, obviously thinking about something of her own. Suddenly she raised her head and turned to everyone present. "Did you know that the florist offered me roses for $3 apiece? $3! For the most ordinary roses, I told him you could buy high-end peonies for that kind of money." Soledad and Augusto looked at each other. $3 for a rose was an unthinkable sum for them. "Valeria, dear," said Leandro softly, "can we not discuss prices at the table?" "What's the big deal?" She was surprised. "We are a family, we can talk about everything openly. By the way, Mom, I saw the decorations for the hall that Leandro's parents ordered. Honestly, they look pretty cheap." There was an awkward silence. Soledad blushed and lowered her eyes, and Augusto clenched his fists under the table. "Valeria," I said sternly, "this is inappropriate." "What's inappropriate?" she continued, not noticing the general embarrassment. "I'm just telling the truth. Those ribbons and flowers look like decorations for a children's party, not a wedding. It's a good thing we have the option of paying extra for something more decent." Leandro looked at his bride with obvious disapproval. "Valeria, stop that right now." "Why?" She shrugged her shoulders. "If I were marrying someone more affluent, there wouldn't be such problems. Remember Ricardo Mendez, the son of a lawyer? He used to ask me out on dates when we weren't dating yet." There was dead silence. Soledad was ready to fall through the ground, and Augusto stared at his plate with clenched teeth. Leandro turned pale with anger. "I'm sorry," Soledad said quietly, turning to me. "Maybe we should leave." "Of course not," I answered quickly. "Valeria, apologize immediately." "Apologize for what?" The daughter looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't say anything bad. I'm just stating the facts." "Valeria," Leandro raised his voice, "you are behaving disgustingly. Apologize to my parents right now." Okay. She rolled her eyes. "I apologize if I offended you. I just want our wedding to be perfect." The apology sounded so insincere that it only made it worse. Soledad nodded, but it was obvious she was deeply offended. The rest of the dinner passed in a tense atmosphere. The Hernandezes tried to keep up the conversation out of politeness, but the joy of the encounter was finally spoiled. Valeria continued to complain about various details of the wedding, each time emphasizing their cost and her dissatisfaction with the quality of some services. "Do you know how much a good videotaping costs?" She turned to Leandro's parents. $2,000 for just 4 hours of work. But what can you do if you want quality results? Augusto choked on his water. $2,000 was almost half of his annual salary. "Valeria," again tried to stop her Leandro, "can we talk about something else?" "About what?" She shrugged her shoulders. "Wedding is the most important event in our lives. It is natural that we discuss the details." After dessert, the guests began to go home. Soledad helped me clear the table. apologizing several times that they couldn't afford the more expensive decorations for the hall. "Soledad, please don't think about it," I told her. "Everything will be fine. The most important thing is the love of our children." "Of course," she agreed, but there were tears in her eyes. "We tried so hard. We took a loan from the bank so that everything would be worthy." That phrase hurt me. I knew that the Hernandezes lived from paycheck to paycheck, and the thought of going into debt to get married made me feel guilty. After they left, Valeria and Leandro packed up to go home too. The groom looked upset and angry. "Valeria, your behavior today was unacceptable," he said as he put on his jacket. "What did I do?" She was surprised. "Did I speak my mind?" "You humiliated my parents," Leandro replied harshly. "They are doing everything they can to make our wedding beautiful. If you earned more, they wouldn't have to work so hard." Valeria threw and left the house, slamming the door loudly. Leandro looked at me confused. "I'm sorry about her, Señora Clarabelle. I don't know what got into her." "Don't worry, son," I said, though I was embarrassed. "Pre-wedding nerves, it's normal." After they left, I was alone in a house that an hour ago had been full of voices and laughter. Now it felt empty and cold. I washed the dishes slowly, replaying the events of the evening in my head. The next day, Patricia came to see me, as usual, after work. One look at my face was enough for her to know that something was wrong. "Tell me," she said, sitting down in her chair. I told her about last night's dinner, and I didn't hold back the details. Patricia listened in silence, shaking her head now and then. "Poor people," she said when I was done. "I can imagine how embarrassing that must have been for them." "Patti, I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Valeria is acting like a spoiled princess. She doesn't think about other people's feelings at all." "What did Leandro say?" "He tried to talk some sense into her, but she doesn't listen. She seems to think that everyone owes her and she doesn't owe anyone anything." Patricia stared thoughtfully out the window. "You know what bothers me the most?" She finally said it. "What?" "The way she talked about how she could have married someone better off. That's a terrible thing to say in front of your fiancé and his parents." I nodded. That phrase stuck in my head like a thorn in my side, too. "Sometimes I think I was wrong about her upbringing," I admitted. "Maybe I let her do too much, demanded too little." "Clarabelle, you're a good mother," Patricia reassured me. "It's just that some people mistake kindness for weakness." We sat in silence, drinking tea. The sun was slowly setting outside the window, coloring the sky pink and orange. The wedding was only 2 days away, and I felt like I was preparing for a funeral. Friday, the day before the wedding, started with a torrential downpour. I woke up early, around 6 in the morning, and lay in bed for a long time, listening to the drops drumming on the roof. My heart was beating unevenly. My daughter was getting married tomorrow, and I felt a strange anxiety instead of joy. After breakfast, I took care of the last preparations. I had to iron my dress for tomorrow's ceremony, check on the newlyweds' gift, and clean the house in case any of the guests stopped by after the ceremony. The work distracted me from the heavy thoughts that hadn't left me since last night's dinner. Around 11 in the morning, the doorbell rang. I opened it and saw Valerie. She stood on the doorstep in jeans and a t-shirt, her hair carelessly gathered into a ponytail. Her daughter's face was serious, even stern, not the way a bride should be on the eve of her wedding. "Hi, Mom," she said, walking into the house. "We need to talk." Sure, honey," I said, closing the door. "Would you like some coffee or tea?" "You don't need anything," Valeria waved me away. "Just sit down and listen to me carefully." We went into the living room. Valeria sat in the chair across from me, her arms crossed over her chest. There was something defiant, almost aggressive in her posture. "Mom, I know how much money you have," she began without preamble. The words came like a thunderclap. I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you talking about, Valerie?" "Don't pretend," my daughter said sharply. "I know everything. After Dad died, there were $130,000 left in his accounts. You spent about $30,000 on my wedding, so that leaves you with about $100,000. I looked at my daughter and couldn't believe my ears. How could she know the exact figures? I had never told my children about the size of the inheritance. Valeria, even if that's true, I don't see where you're going with this. I tried to stay calm. The point is that the money should belong to me, she said with unbelievable directness. Think about it, Mom. You're 58 years old, retired. You live alone in this house. All your needs are minimal. Why do you need that kind of money? I was silent, not knowing what to say to such insolence. And Leandro and I are just starting our lives, Valeria continued, encouraged by her own words. We need a house, a better car, furniture, appliances. We are planning children, and children require money. It is logical that these funds should be used to create a young family, not lying dead weight in your account. Valeria, I said quietly, I've already spent over $30,000 on your wedding. Bought you an $8,000 car, isn't that enough? It's not enough, my daughter replied stiffly. That money is a drop in the bucket compared to what we'll need. We found a nice house in a new neighborhood for $75,000. If you give us $100,000, we can buy it and still have enough left over to fix it up. I felt dizzy. Valeria spoke as if my money was already hers by right. My daughter, I tried to explain, this money is my only security for my old age. I have a small pension, no other sources of income. What happens if I get sick? If I need expensive treatment? What are you making up? Valeria waved her hand irritably. You're healthy. You can live for another 20 years or even more. And if anything happens, Fabian and I will take care of you. Fabian can barely make ends meet, I reminded him. He's got his own problems. Exactly, Valeria exclaimed, as if I had proved her right. He needs help too. But first, let me get my life together, and then we'll think about my brother. I looked at my daughter and did not recognize her. When did she become so calculating and selfish? Where was that little girl who clung to me when she was scared or sad? Valerie, I tried to be firm, I can't give you all my savings. It's unreasonable and unfair. My daughter's face changed instantly. The last traces of the charm she usually used to get what she wanted were gone. Unfair? She repeated, raising her voice. Is it fair that you're sitting on a pile of money while your children are in need? I'm not sitting on money, I objected. I spent a huge amount on your wedding, bought you a car. Crumbs! Valeria interrupted me. Pathetic crumbs! You spent $30,000 out of $130. Is that a feat? She got up from the chair and began to walk around the room, waving her hands. Mom, this is the last time I'm asking you nicely. Give me that money. The whole $100,000. Tomorrow, right after the wedding, we'll go to the bank and transfer it to my account. No, I said firmly. The word sounded quieter than I wanted it to, but Valeria heard it clearly. No? She asked, a dangerous note in her voice. No, I repeated louder. I'm not giving you all my money, Valerie. It's my old age security, and I have the right to use it as I see fit. My daughter stopped in the middle of the room and looked at me intently. There was an expression in her eyes that I had never seen before, a mixture of anger, contempt, and a kind of cold hatred. So then, she said slowly. So you're a greedy old sheep who's willing to sit on money while her own children live in want. Valerie, I exclaimed, shocked by such words. Valerie, what? She shouted. I'm telling you the truth. You're selfish and miserly. All your life you've been counting every peso. And now that you have real money, you've turned into a real greed. Tears filled my eyes, but Valeria wasn't going to stop. Do you know what my friends tell me? She continued with fury. They wonder why I'm paying for the wedding dress, for jewelry, for everything else. They think I have a poor mother who can't help her daughter on such an important day. But I'm paying for half the wedding, I objected weakly. Half, Valeria snorted contemptuously. And the other half had to pay Leandro's parents who got into debt. Can you imagine how it looks like? A rich widow forcing a poor family to take a loan for her daughter's wedding. Those words hit me where it hurt the most. I really felt guilty in front of the Hernandez family. I'm ashamed of you, Mother, Valeria continued with cold fury. Ashamed of you for being so greedy and heartless. Everyone in town knows that after Daddy died, you became rich, but you behave like a beggar. Stop it, I shouted, unable to withstand the torrent of insults. Enough, Valeria. You have no right to talk to me like that. I do, she yelled back. Because you're a bad mother. Because you only think about yourself. Do you know what Leandro said to me last night after dinner? That he didn't understand how you could be so stingy with your own children. It was a lie. I knew it. Leandro would never say anything like that. He's too well-mannered and delicate a man. But Valeria was ready for any slander, just to get her way. "You are ruining my wedding," she shouted, tears of rage running down her cheeks. "Everyone will talk about how greedy my mother is. How will I be able to look people in the eye?" "Valerie, please calm down," I begged. "Tomorrow is your wedding, the most important day of your life. Let's not fight." "Let's not fight?" She laughed hysterically. "Who started the quarrel? Who refuses to help their own daughter?" She came close to me, and I saw such anger in her eyes that I recoiled. "Do you know what I'm going to tell you, dear mommy?" Valerie hissed. "If you do not change your mind by tomorrow, if you do not give me this money, you cannot come to my wedding at all. I do not need such a mother." With these words, she turned around and headed for the exit. "Valerie, wait!" I shouted after her. "Don't go like that! Let's talk calmly!" But my daughter had already slammed the front door. I heard the car start, and she drove away, leaving me alone with a broken heart. I collapsed into the chair and burst into tears. The tears poured down in a flood that had no end. All my fears, all my doubts of the last few weeks came out in this crying. Am I really a bad mother? Am I as selfish as Valerie says? An hour later, when the tears had subsided a bit, I called Patricia. My voice was hoarse from sobbing. "Pati, can you come over?" I asked. "I feel really bad." "Of course, friend. I'll be there in half an hour." Patricia came in with a bag of groceries and immediately started making chamomile tea. "Tell me what happened," she said, sitting me down at the kitchen table. I told her about Valerie's visit, not hiding a single detail. Patricia listened in silence, her face growing darker with each word I said. "That rascal," she said quietly when I was done. "How could she talk to you like that?" "Maybe she's right," I sobbed. "Maybe I really am selfish." "Clarabelle, don't be silly," Patricia said sternly. "You spent over $30,000 on that ungrateful girl. That's a fortune." "But I do have more money," I continued to wonder, "and young people need it more." "Listen to me carefully." Patricia took my hands. "This money is yours. Your husband worked all his life to save it. It's meant to provide for you, not for your spoiled daughter's whims." We sat in the kitchen until evening discussing the situation. Patricia tried to comfort me, but I couldn't get Valerie's last words out of my head that I shouldn't come to the wedding. "What should I do, Pati?" I asked. "Tomorrow is my only daughter's wedding, and she doesn't want to see me." "Go to the wedding," my friend said firmly. "No matter what, it's your right as a mother." That evening, after Patricia left, I sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about what had happened. Tomorrow was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life, but it had turned into a nightmare. But despite all the words I had said, despite the threats and insults, I couldn't cancel the financing of the wedding. Everything had already been ordered, paid for, people invited. Besides, not only Valeria would suffer, but also Leandro and his parents. The morning of the wedding day greeted me with gray skies and drizzling rain. I almost didn't sleep all night, replaying in my head the conversation with Valeria yesterday. Every word she'd said, every insult, had hurt my chest. But today was her wedding day, and no matter what, I had to be there. Around 9 a.m., Patricia called. "What's up, girlfriend? How was your night?" "I didn't sleep well," I admitted. "I kept thinking about last night." "Clarabelle, you're going to the wedding, period," she said firmly. "It's your daughter, no matter what she says. What are you going to wear?" I looked at the new dress that had been hanging in my closet for a week. Dark blue, elegant, with a little sequin on the bodice. It cost a lot, but I wanted to look dignified for my only daughter's wedding. "The blue one I bought last week," I said. "Great. And don't forget your present." The gift was on the dresser in a beautiful package, a set of bed linens made of expensive cotton and a vase of Bohemian glass. Another $700 expense, but I wanted the young ones to remember the day. The ceremony at the church was scheduled for 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and the banquet was to begin at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the Las Palmas restaurant. I had time to calmly pack, tidy up, and mentally prepare myself to meet my daughter. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, doing my hair. I had dyed my hair, which had begun to gray after the death of my husband, last week in my natural brown color. Light makeup hid the traces of a sleepless night and tears. In my blue dress, I looked decent enough for a 58-year-old woman. I arrived at the church half an hour before the ceremony began. The small church of St. Rose was decorated with white and pink flowers, the same expensive decorations Valerie had spent the extra money on. Guests had already begun to gather, and I recognized many: neighbors, distant relatives, family friends. Valeria looked really beautiful in her $2,300 white dress. The veil was long and airy, and in her hair glittered those very gold earrings with diamonds for $3,000. She was radiant with happiness as she accepted the congratulations of the guests, and it seemed that yesterday's quarrel was only a bad dream. Leandro stood at the altar in a dark suit, nervously adjusting his tie. As Valeria walked down the aisle toward him to the sound of the organ, many of the women in the church wiped away tears of emotion. I cried too, but my tears were bitter. During the ceremony, I sat in the third row next to Valeria's aunt, my late husband's sister. Valeria never once looked in my direction, as if I wasn't even in the church. When the priest asked if there were any objections to the marriage, I thought for a second that she was afraid I would say the wrong thing. After the ceremony, the guests went home to change for the banquet. I had 2 hours before the reception at the restaurant. I stopped by the house, grabbed a bite to eat, and checked my appearance one more time. At 3:30, I arrived at the Las Palmas restaurant. The large banquet hall was decorated in white and gold colors, exactly as Valeria wanted. The tables were covered with snow-white tablecloths. In the center of each stood bouquets of white roses and gold ribbons. Everything looked luxurious and expensive. I walked to the entrance of the hall, holding the gift in my hands. I was wearing the same blue dress, a small purse to match, and low-heeled shoes. I looked like a decent, middle-aged woman attending a relative's wedding. But as soon as I crossed the threshold of the banquet hall, something terrible happened. Valeria was standing at the entrance, greeting the guests with Leandro. She was already in a different dress, more simple for dancing, and in the same sandals for $500. When she saw me, she abruptly broke away from the conversation with some people and headed in my direction. "Stop!" she shouted loudly, holding out her hand. "This woman is an outsider." All the conversations in the hall instantly stopped. The guests turned in our direction, and I felt dozens of surprised stares. "I don't know this woman!" Valeria continued to shout, pointing her finger at me. "She is not invited to my wedding." I stood there like a dumbfounded, unable to utter a single word. The gift was trembling in my hands, and my heart was beating so loudly that I was afraid everyone would hear it. "Valeria, what are you doing?" Leandro asked confusedly as he approached us. "I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago," she replied, keeping her angry eyes on me. "Security! Where are the guards?" 2 young men in black suits came up to us, the restaurant security guards. They looked confused and didn't understand what was going on. "Take this woman out," Valeria ordered them. "She came uninvited." "But señorita," one of the guards began, "maybe we should sort this out." "I am the bride and this is my wedding," Valeria shouted. "I'm telling you, take her out now." The guards hesitantly stepped toward me. I backed away, still not believing what was happening. Was my own daughter really kicking me out of her wedding? There was dead silence in the hall. The guests looked at us as if we were a performance, not realizing what was happening. I saw the faces of people I knew, neighbors I greeted every day, distant relatives, family friends. They were all in shock. "Stop!" came a loud voice from across the tables. Fabian was making his way across the room. My son was dressed in his best suit, which he wore only on big holidays. His face was grim and his jaw was clenched with anger. "What's going on here?" he asked, coming to a stop beside me. "Fabian, don't interfere," Valeria warned him. "It's none of your business." "None of my business?" he repeated, his voice filled with a fury he couldn't hide. "When my sister disgraces our mother in front of the whole town, it's none of my business?" "I'm not dishonoring anyone," Valeria snapped back. "I just don't want to see people I don't like at my wedding." Fabian looked at the guards, who were still standing around, not knowing what to do. "Get out," he told them calmly but very firmly. "This is a family matter, and it doesn't concern you." The guards were relieved and stepped aside. They clearly didn't want to get involved in a family drama. "Mom, let's go," Fabian said, taking my hand. "We'll find you a seat at the table." I was still in shock and couldn't speak. My son led me across the room to one of the tables in the far corner. The guests parted before us, but I could feel their gazes of curiosity and sympathy. "Sit here," Fabian said, pulling out a chair for me. "I'll get you some water." I sank into the chair, still clutching the gift in my hands. Sitting next to me was an older woman I recognized as a distant relative of my late husband. "Clarabelle, sweetheart," she said quietly. "What's wrong? Why is Valeria acting like this?" I only shook my head, unable to explain. "How can you tell me that your own daughter demanded all your money, and when she refused, decided to humiliate you publicly?" Fabian came back with a glass of water and put it in front of me. "Drink it," he said. "You need to calm down." I took a few sips of the cold water and felt myself come to my senses a little. Around us, the guests were slowly returning to their conversations, but I could see them sneaking glances in our direction. "Mom, maybe we should leave," Fabian asked quietly. "We don't have to endure this humiliation." I looked at my son and saw pain and anger in his eyes. Fabian had always been a calm man, but now he could barely contain himself. "No," I said, surprised at myself. "I'm staying. It's my daughter's wedding and I have a right to be here." Meanwhile, Valeria pretended that nothing had happened. She smiled at the guests, accepted congratulations, danced with her husband. But every now and then I caught a glimpse of her, full of cold hatred. Leandro looked confused and unhappy. Several times he came to our table as if he wanted to say something, but each time Valeria distracted him, taking him to other guests. The groom's parents sat at a neighboring table and were clearly shocked at what was happening. Soledad tried to approach me several times, but Valeria stopped her each time, talking about something urgent. Dinner was served as scheduled, and the food was really good. I had chosen the menu myself and knew that the chefs at Las Palmas were excellent, but I hardly ate anything, just picking at the salad on my plate with my fork. "Mom, eat a little," Fabian urged me. "You need your strength." The musicians were playing cheerful tunes, the guests were dancing and having fun. Valeria was the center of attention, a beautiful bride in an expensive dress with shiny jewelry. She laughed, danced with her husband, posed for photos. But not once during the entire evening did she look in my direction. Moreover, when the photographer offered to take a shared family photo, she flatly refused. "Only with Leandro's parents," she said, "and her brother." Fabian refused to be photographed without me, and in the end there was no family photo at all. Fabian stayed with me the whole evening. He danced with one of the bridesmaids when he was invited, but he spent most of the time next to me, keeping me talking and making sure I wasn't alone. "Thank you, son," I told him as we sat at the nearly empty table at the end of the evening. "If it weren't for you, I don't know what I'd be doing." "Mom, I'm your son," he replied simply. "Where am I going to go?" I'd been sitting at my table in the far corner of the room for hours, watching the gala where I'd been an unwanted guest. Fabian came over to me occasionally, bringing me water, trying to make conversation with the other guests at our table, but I could see how hard it was for him. All evening he was torn between wanting to support me and trying to maintain at least a semblance of family unity. Valerie continued to play the role of the happy bride. She danced, laughed, accepted congratulations, posed for photos. Several times I caught her glance, and each time I could read in her eyes the same cold hatred as yesterday at my house. It was obvious that she had no regrets for her words and actions. Leandro looked more and more unhappy by the hour. I saw him try to approach our table several times, casting confused glances in my direction, but each time Valeria intercepted him, dragged him away to the other guests, made him dance or take pictures. Around 10:30 in the evening, when the celebration was in full swing, something changed in me. I was sitting there holding a gift I had never been able to give, and I suddenly realized that I couldn't keep quiet anymore. All these months of preparation for the wedding, all the money spent, all the humiliation and insults, all this demanded an answer. I got up from the table and Fabian was immediately alert. "Mom, what are you doing?" he asked quietly. "Something I should have done a long time ago," I answered, my voice sounding surprisingly firm. I walked across the hall to the small stage where the musicians were standing. The host, a young man in a brightly colored suit, was just announcing the next dance. When he saw me, he smiled and held out his hand. "Senora, do you have something to say?" he asked politely. "Yes," I replied. "I want to congratulate the newlyweds." Of course," rejoiced the host. "The mother of the bride wants to make a toast." He handed me the microphone, and I felt its weight pressing against my palm. The conversations in the hall gradually subsided, and the guests turned in my direction. I saw surprised faces. Many remembered the scene at the entrance and did not expect me to make a speech. Valeria was dancing with Leandro in the center of the room, and when she realized what was happening, she stopped abruptly. Her face turned pale and her eyes widened with horror. "Dear guests," I began, and my voice sounded surprisingly calm and clear. "May I have your attention, please?" The hall finally fell silent. The musicians stopped playing. The waiters froze with trays in their hands. Everyone looked at me, an elderly woman in a blue dress who held the microphone with trembling hands. "My name is Claribel Caceres," I continued, looking directly into the audience. "I am the mother of the bride, although today my daughter claimed not to know me." There was a barely audible whisper in the hall. The guests looked at each other, not sure where I was going with this. "I want to tell you a story," I said, and there was no anger or resentment in my voice, just tiredness. The story of how I was preparing for this wedding. Valeria tried to move toward me, but Leandro held her arm back. He looked at me with a strange expression on his face, as if he finally understood what was happening. "2 months ago, my daughter came to me and told me she was getting married," I continued. "I was happy for her. What mother doesn't rejoice at her child's happiness?" I paused, looking around the room. Many of the women nodded. They understood the sentiment. "Valeria asked me to pay for half of the wedding," I continued. I agreed. Banquet for 100 people, $12,000. Photographer, 1,200. Musicians, 800. Hall decoration, 900. Flowers, $350. I listed the sums and I saw the faces of the guests change. For many of the people there, it was a lot of money. "Then I had to buy a wedding dress for $2,300, I continued. Shoes for $400, lingerie for $200. Then my daughter saw some beautiful jewelry in a magazine and asked for another $3,000 for gold earrings and a bracelet. There was dead silence in the room. Everyone looked at me, then shifted their eyes to Valeria, who stood as if petrified. "I bought the newlyweds a car as a present," I continued, "a used one, but in good condition, $8,000. Then my daughter asked for another $500 for a second pair of dancing shoes." I watched Soledad and Augusto sit at their table with their heads down. They were ashamed that they couldn't afford such an expense. "In total, I spent over $30,000 on this wedding," I said. "That's a lot of money for me, a retiree. But I was willing to spend it for my daughter's happiness." Fabian sat at our table with his hands clenched into fists. He looked at his sister with an expression I'd never seen on his face. "Valeria came to see me yesterday, the night before the wedding," I continued, my voice quieter, but the room was so quiet that I could hear every word. "She said she knew about my savings, that I had a lot of money left over after my husband died." I saw a few of the guests glance over. Apparently there were rumors in the small town about my inheritance. "Valerie demanded that I give her all my money," I said. "All $100,000. She said an old woman wouldn't need it, but a young family could use it to buy a house." There was a whisper of surprise in the room. Many of the guests looked at the bride in bewilderment. "When I refused to give her all my savings," I continued, "my daughter called me a greedy old sheep. She said I was selfish and cheap, that she was ashamed to have such a mother." Valeria tried to say something, but her voice was drowned in the whispers of the indignant guests. "Wait, she told me that if I didn't give her the money, I might not come to the wedding," I continued, "that she didn't want a mother like that." I looked at my daughter, who stood in the center of the hall, beautiful in her expensive dress and precious jewelry paid for with my money. "But I came anyway," I said. "Because it's my daughter's wedding," I came with a gift, with a new dress, with the hope that she would change her mind, that we would make up. I picked up the gift I had been holding in my hands the whole time. Instead, she announced to everyone that she didn't know me. I continued, that I was an outsider, asked security to escort me out of the auditorium. There was movement in the hall. Several older women rose from their seats, shaking their heads in disapproval. They remembered a time when respect for parents was sacred. I want everyone to know the truth, I said, and my voice grew stronger. I spent over $30,000 on this wedding. I bought everything my daughter asked for. I paid for this banquet, these flowers, this music. I did everything I could to make her wedding beautiful. I looked around the room, decorated with my money. But you can't buy love, I said quietly. Neither can respect, and without love and respect, all that money is just paper. Valeria finally managed to get away from her husband and walked quickly in my direction. "Stop it!" she shouted. "Give me the microphone!" But I wasn't going to stop. "So I'm announcing," I said, looking directly at my daughter, "that as of today, I have no daughter named Valerie. Until she apologizes for her words and actions, until she understands what she has done, I want nothing to do with her." There was complete silence in the hall. Even the musicians froze, not knowing what to do. "Valeria got everything she wanted from me," I continued. "A beautiful wedding, expensive jewelry, gifts, but she didn't get the most important thing, my blessing. Because a mother can't bless a daughter who doesn't respect her." I handed the microphone to the host, who accepted it with trembling hands. "Thank you all for your attention," I said. "I wish you a pleasant evening." I saw the expression on the guests' faces change from surprise to understanding, from bewilderment to outrage. Many nodded in agreement with my words. The older women shook their heads in disapproval, and the men frowned, apparently imagining themselves in Leandro's shoes. Valeria stood in the center of the room, and I could see her thinking quickly about what to do next. She tried to speak, but her voice was drowned in the growing noise. The guests began to discuss what they had heard among themselves, and their voices merged into a general rumble of indignation. How could she do that to her own mother? I heard the voice of one of my neighbors. $30,000, someone exclaimed. "You could feed the whole town for that kind of money." "And she demanded another $100,000, added another voice. She had lost her conscience. Leandro stood next to his wife, and on his face was written such pain that I felt sorry for him. Obviously, he did not know about Valeria's conversation with me yesterday. For him, my revelation was a complete surprise. The groom's parents sat at their table with their heads down. Soledad was crying, and Augusto was clenching his fists. They clearly felt guilty about not being able to pay for their half of the wedding without a loan. As I left the hall, I left a real commotion behind me. Guests rose from their seats, gathered in groups, and discussed what they had heard. Many cast judgmental glances in the direction of the bride. The first to leave were 3 elderly women, neighbors from our street. They had known our family for many years and remembered how obedient and sweet little Valeria was. "We can't stay at such a celebration," said one of them, passing by me. "This is not a wedding, but a disgrace." Others followed them. The Moreno family with their 3 children. They lived across the street from us. Then the late husband's colleagues with their wives. They worked together in the municipality and knew what an honest and decent man Ricardo was. "I'm sorry, Clarabelle," Eduardo Ramos, who had worked in the office next to my husband's for many years, said to me. "But we can't sit at the same table with a man who is so disrespectful to his parents." His wife Maria nodded and added, "Ricardo would roll over in his coffin if he saw what his daughter had become." Distant relatives began to gather as well. Her late husband's cousin and his family, Valeria's maternal aunt, even the young cousins who used to adore Valeria. "Aunt Clarabelle," 20-year-old Rocio, my late sister's daughter, told me, "I don't want to stay here any longer. What Valeria has done is terrible." Half an hour after my speech, more than half the guests had left the hall. Remained mostly young people, friends of Valeria and Leandro, who apparently did not fully understand the seriousness of the situation, as well as some colleagues of the groom. The musicians did not know what to do. They tried to play cheerful tunes, but the atmosphere in the hall was funeral-like. The waiters looked at each other confusedly, not knowing whether to continue the service or curtail the event. I stood in the hallway of the restaurant, receiving words of encouragement from the departing guests. Many women hugged me, and men shook my hand sympathetically. "You did the right thing to tell the truth," they said. "Let everyone know what an ungrateful daughter you have grown up to be." "Nowadays, children no longer respect their parents at all," sighed one of the older women. "It's good that you didn't let yourself get hurt." Fabian left the hall later than the others. His face was a mixture of pride and sadness. "Mom," he said, coming toward me, "I saw Valeria trying to explain to the rest of the guests that you made it all up, but few believed her." "What did Leandro say?" I asked. "Nothing. He just stood there silent. I think he was shocked to hear about his wife." We went out to the parking lot, where the cars of those guests who had decided to stay until the end were still parked. But they were really few, maybe 30 people out of the 100 invited. "Can you believe it?" Fabian said as we got into the car. "She spent $30,000 on a wedding, and in the end, most of the guests left before it was over." "Money doesn't buy respect," I replied. She'd realize that today. On the way home, I thought about what had happened. Was it the right thing to do? Maybe I could have talked to Valeria alone, kept it to myself. But she had driven me to the point where it was impossible to keep quiet. At home, I sat in an armchair for a long time, replaying the day's events in my head. The house was quiet and peaceful, a contrast to the chaos I'd left behind at the restaurant. Around 11 p.m., Patricia called. Her voice sounded worried. "Clarabelle, I've had 5 people call me already. The whole town is talking about what happened at the wedding." "What are they saying?" I asked. "That you did a good job of finally putting Valerie in her place. People are outraged by her behavior. Many say that they saw for themselves what she became capricious and demanding." Patricia told me that the story about my speech has already spread all over San Miguel. In a small town, news travels fast, especially scandalous news like this. "A neighbor said she saw the guests leaving the restaurant," Patricia continued. "She said many of them were in tears of outrage. The next morning, people started coming to see me. First my neighbors, then distant acquaintances, then even those with whom I hardly spoke. Everyone wanted to show their support and find out more." "Clarabelle, we're all on your side," they said. "Valerie's behavior was awful, and you showed her that parents should be respected." Some told their stories of ungrateful children, of how today's young people no longer appreciate parental sacrifice. "My daughter also demands money for stupid things," admitted one of her neighbors. "After your story, I realized that it's time to set boundaries." By evening, 10 women of different ages had gathered at my house. We drank tea and discussed what had happened. A lot of people thought I did the right thing by telling the truth publicly. "Let everyone know what she is like," they said. "Let her be ashamed of her behavior." A few days passed, and the story began to grow. People said that they saw Valeria in the store, and she looked depressed. Someone heard that the newlyweds quarreled over money. I felt strange. On the one hand, I was sad that my relationship with my daughter had reached an impasse. On the other hand, for the first time in years, I felt that I had done the right thing by protecting my dignity.